to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Kristen Tatroe. Kristen, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's my pleasure, Jen. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited you were here. We've been having such a lovely time chatting before we hit record, and there were so many nuggets that you shared that I can't wait for our listeners to get to hear too. Let's just start with how did you get into the writing world?
I am so glad you asked that. I was an angsty teenager, as so many of us were. In high school, I said, I want to be a writer. So I only applied to schools for college that had writing degrees of some sort. And I ended up going to UC Santa Cruz that had a creative writing program. They still do have a creative writing program, as far as I know. And I said, oh, this is great. I went into college. Took the writing class. I said, I'm going to be a writer. And then senior year, I realized I didn't enjoy the writing as much as I enjoyed giving others feedback. And so in my little critique group, I loved doing that. And then I found my classmates from other critique groups in that particular senior seminar were bringing me their stuff as well. And then one of my classmates, apparently his mom was an editor. And he came to one of our critique sessions and said, hey, my mom looked over your feedback and she says you're really good and you should think about being an editor. So my brain switched gears and I went, huh, maybe I should be an editor because it's far less painful for me than writing because writing has always been just angst filled in not good way. I know I'm a good writer. I know the writing that I produce is solid, but I much more enjoy helping others elevate their writing, refine their writing, and help them find the right words.
Oh my gosh, I love this so much. That
I
is
love it.
so awesome that you got the feedback though from somebody in the field to say, "Hey, you ought to consider this." So then talk to me about how you did make that transition. Like to say, "Okay, I'm going to embrace editing." How did you go about that?
I started looking at opportunities to work for publishers with the idea that I knew I was going to enter at entry level editorial assistant type thing. Interestingly enough, my first job out of college was working as a marketing and production assistant for a local real estate publisher. So, those real estate magazines, I mean, they're not as popular now because we're more digital now, because I graduated mumble years ago. The magazines and like the real estate ads that you could just pick up out of the newspaper,
Yeah.
not kiosks, little dispensers. That's
Yeah,
the word.
yeah.
Or I can find words much more easily when I'm putting them on the page than when I am speaking.
But that happens though. And one of the things that when we were chatting earlier, you talked about nonfiction editing, but fiction editing. Would you talk about the nuances that how you approach both, even though they're different genres? I know you start with the client in mind, and I would really love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I edit primarily books, fiction, cookbooks, and memoir. And I'll address the similarity first about how I approach memoir because I'm working with a lot of memoir clients at the moment. I approach memoir much the same way that I approach fiction,
Mhm.
in that I'm looking for a narrative thread.
Me
I'm
too.
looking to make sure that the subjects of the memoir actually come across as characters. I'm not a caricature, but a character who is believable and you have some sympathy for them, or you may not have sympathy for them. You may have other feelings toward them, but it's engaging you as a reader
Mhm.
and bringing things up. And with memoir, we have some leeway. I was on a memoir panel at a writers conference earlier this year, and one of the authors I was on the panel with said, "Yeah, so I had five different friends telling me the same thing about what I was going through. I didn't write about all five of them. They all became one person in the memoir." So is that factually correct? Well, no. So you have a little bit of leeway. But as far as nonfiction that's not memoir, I think about who the end user is. So I have a master's in instructional design as well. I got that a few years ago to add to my culinary degree and my bachelor's in literature in fiction. So I'm a degree collector. But as an instructional designer, I'm always thinking of the end user as the learner. And so I realized that I approach editing much the same way. I'm always thinking of the reader, and any editor is going to tell you this, that we edit with the reader in mind. We want to make sure that your words as an author are being portrayed and put on the page in the way that is going to be most accessible and engaging for your intended reader. And that's going to be different for every author. It's the audience for The Shining is going to be very different than the audience for all the Bridgerton books. Now, I'm not saying that the same person doesn't read both, but
Mm.
generally, you're going to approach the edits different for either of those. Now, those are fiction examples. But in terms of approaching a nonfiction book that is teaching you something on a subject, I want to make sure that, first of all, the intended purpose of the book is stated up front, because adult learning theory, adults like to know what they're going to learn, how they're going to apply it to their lives, and how long it's going to take them to get through it. So that is the approach we take to designing courses. And I always like to advise my nonfiction clients to have something like that up front. It's the, why should I bother reading your book? What is it going to get me? And how am
Yes.
I going to use it?
Yes. Oh my, okay. More love language. I love these type of conversations. So when I'm working with a nonfiction writer in particular, and even for myself, when I have two nonfiction books, one I co-authored and one that just came out recently.
Mhm.
And in my two cases, even our introduction chapter, my introduction and my author stylist guide, I viewed that as this is my love letter to my reader. I wrote it with the idea of this is a love letter. What do I really want for you because you've picked up this book? What do I see for you that's possible? What will you gain from this book? What will you learn from this book?
Mhm.
How do you know if this book is for you? Because, it's also one of those where the title might throw somebody off, and that's okay. Stylist, are you like clothing? No, I'm not. But I do have a chapter in there about that. But it's not really about that. It's really about branding. It's a very focused book on certain types of activities within an author business to grow, an editing business to grow. But still, it was intended with a this is who it's for. This is who it's not for. This is what you can expect. This is why. And that also helps set the tone in the book too, which is what you're describing as well, because maybe you have that same idea. You might call it your introduction too, but you might not want to think of it like a love letter, but it's delivering the same type of information so that the reader can assess very quickly, am I the right person? Is this the right book for me at this point where I am? And
Yep.
that's exactly what you want.
Learning objectives right up front. Here's what you're going to get from this book, and here's how you're going to be able to apply it.
But you mentioned something I would love for you to tap into just a smidge, which is with the master's degree that you have and the idea of teaching those learning principles. Would you talk a little bit about how you kind of blend all of those things?
Absolutely. So I have come up with this term this year. I like to call my approach to editing heart forward editing, where I keep the person in mind when I'm editing. And I know for some people that might feel a little squishy and a little, warm and fuzzy, but don't get me wrong, I still give critical feedback. It's not all warm and fuzzies. But I say heart forward because I always want to keep in mind that this is a person who has done a brave thing. I don't care if it's a book on teaching someone how to turn a lathe in woodworking, or it's a memoir about a traumatic experience in your life. I find both people equally brave putting those words on the page. Now, is there going to be more emotional turmoil in one over the other? Sure. And that's where the heart forward part comes in, where I'm keeping in mind what space they have and capacity the author has for receiving my feedback. And that's why I always have an introductory meeting with any author I work with, first of all, to make sure that we're going to work together well, and to make sure that I'm giving them their feedback in a way that they're going to be able to receive it and apply it. So I'm working with a number of different memoir clients at the moment, and my approach with each of them is a little bit different. But something that is the same through all of them is I'm always checking in with them. Does this make sense to you? hey, I noticed this chapter this week was particularly emotionally filled with a lot of traumatic events. How are you doing? Is this bringing stuff up? Do you need some more time to go over my feedback to kind of give yourself space? And I always give them a reminder too. And again, this comes up with the memoir clients more so than my semi-fiction clients or nonfiction clients. Always let me know if you need some more space, if you need more time to get me the pages. Your mental health and emotional well-being are more important than us pushing through this manuscript because the words and the pages are always going to be there. So I always try to keep the person in mind because also on the end of all of this are going to be people reading this manuscript. And I think if we put the humanity in the process of editing and revising and going through all of that, then that is going to be on the page for the reader too. And I think that's going to resonate very well for readers.
Yes, I so love everything you said because I too approach my work that way. But I really love the phrasing that you used, heart-centered, heart-forward editing. Would you go into that a little bit more? Because you made a really great point that there are times when you need to provide some constructive feedback. Something's not working. Something truly is, it needs to be omitted, it needs to be rewritten, it needs to, a character's flat, and we need to either exclude them or better develop them or something. But how do you go about when you really do need to, you're feeling like you need to be a little bit more critical about a certain part, yet honoring that space? How do you go about that?
Well, first of all, I make sure that I point out strengths in the manuscript too, because how are the authors going to be able to learn what they're doing well if we don't reinforce that and point it out? Hey, this works really well, and here's why. And that's the crucial part on both giving critical feedback and positive feedback is why does it work or why does it not work? Because you can sit there and say, yeah, this is flat. Okay. So authors, especially first-time authors, they're not going to know. More seasoned authors, they're going to be able to, especially if it's an author you as an editor have been working with for a while, you have that shorthand. But I work with a lot of first-time authors, and I say, if I notice something when I'm reading it during my review, and if I something clicks and go, okay, this isn't working, I have to ask myself why in the first place. If I cannot articulate it to myself, I can't articulate it to the author, and I'm not doing them any favors.
Yeah.
I'm doing them a great disservice, as a matter of fact, if I just said, eh, because I've received critical feedback that has not been supported with, okay, but how can I address this? How can I fix this? And all it feels like is, you suck. You're a terrible writer. This is bad.
Mhm.
And unless you back it up with, here's why it's not working. And then the other part of that is, consider doing this, or consider rephrasing to this, or perhaps think about that. I don't want to call it soft language, but instead of just being blunt and go, do this instead, I say, consider doing this, or the reader may not understand what you're getting at right here. And it's always framing it and reminding them that I'm the reader's advocate, both for the reader and for them as the author. I'm like bridging the gap between the two spaces.
And what I hear you doing is a few things. One, offering solutions.
Yeah.
And two, the language, I don't necessarily consider using something like consider or perhaps as soft language. It's not saying that what you are offering doesn't make sense or doesn't have the thought processes behind it. It's not that you're not confident with what you're saying. What I perceive that, and what, at least when I use this, and please tell me if this is where you are too, is that when I do that, it's also a showing the writer, yes, I know you're working with me to strengthen your manuscript. And it is an honor to be able to do so because I genuinely want that person to be successful, and it is their book. And
Yeah.
so if they read the feedback and then they say, you know, although I understand why going back to the teachings pieces, I understand why you're making this suggestion. I don't like this solution that you're giving, but
Mhm.
I gotta get that, like the character being flat. I would go in and say, consider doing this and this to show them a little differently or to add some depth here. They might go, that doesn't feel right, but I get what you're saying. So it might make them think about the whole thing differently
Yeah.
just because you've given them more information to be able to make educated decisions.
Oh, I absolutely love those moments when they go, "Yeah, I'm not really feeling this, but what if I were to do this?" And I'm sitting here going, "Yes,
Yes,
thank
yes.
you." And sometimes, more often than not, they come up with a much more elegant solution because it's their work, it's their baby, right?
Yes.
I tell my clients when I deliver the edit, whether that's a developmental edit, a manuscript critique, or even a light copy edit, which is just this side of proofreading, you're going to look at my feedback and then put the manuscript in a drawer, so to speak, for at least 24 hours. Longer is better. I said, because two things are going to happen. You're going to get offended and you're going to get really mad at me about something, if not about all of it. I said, then go back. I said, it's fine. I can take it. I'm sitting here being critical of this thing that you have poured your heart and soul and probably tears into. And I respect that and I reinforce. I want to just say I am honored that you have entrusted me with your words. And I want to reiterate that you are brave for doing this. Then go back and look at it. And I've had a number of clients come back and say, that was some of the best advice I'd written because I was really upset at you.
But to your point, it's one of those things where it's yes, that person, and I've written manuscripts and turned them into an editor, and you know, and you do feel brave. And in the same breath, remember that you trusted your judgment to hire that person. You actually have a great match with your editor, and you know that this person has your back, and you do feel like it's the right person. And it's still hard initially to get that, but when you're going back to, I trusted my judgment, I hired the right person, I was discerning in doing so. This person was the right person for my project. They have my back. They really care about me. They care about this piece, and they care about the reader I'm trying to serve. It takes some heat off. It takes some
Yeah.
pressure off, and it helps you as a writer to detach and look at the manuscript. And then it helps you as an editor too to detach and look at the manuscript because when I'm working on a piece, I don't sit there and spend 8 to 10 hours on that manuscript in one day. I work on it, I walk
Mm,
away from it, I come
same.
back to it. Ideas will hit me as I'm doing something else, anything else. I could be cooking dinner and that person's project is on my mind. And it's like, I need to go back and check XYZ, or I need
Yep.
to make sure I mention ABC. Let me go back and check. I always leave myself voice messages.
Nice. I know I have notepads in every room in my house. Yeah, it's the shower thoughts.
Yes, yes.
I saw something on social media the other day from an author, and she said they said something like, "I always have the best ideas in the shower. I'm legitimately thinking about putting a whiteboard up in my shower."
Yeah, I think they're called like aqua notes or something. I've seen
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
like that. But yeah, and so you mentioned something with like memoir and trauma in particular, and I would like for you to touch on something because I think that editing rather when you're writing a memoir and you want to your point, you want to stay true to that story. You aren't trying to sugarcoat. You're trying to be fair in your portrayal. How do you guide them on when to zoom in on this detail, this situation, or these details are the right ones to be telling at this point, even if it's uncomfortable? So what they've written might be uncomfortable, but it's appropriate. Or when it's like, no, we need to zoom out. Try rewriting this and zoom out from that. How do you guide them?
I always take the position of the reader. So in my experience with a lot of memoirs that have trauma in them, it's a catharsis for the author, which it should
Mhm.
be. And I have noted that sometimes it gets into trauma dumping, right?
Yes.
And I want them to have that space to do that,
Mhm.
but is it going to serve the reader? So I work with my memoir authors early on to establish the narrative thread. What is the story you want to tell? Not the story of you went through this. What we have a beginning, we have, a middle, and we have an end. And this is not an autobiography. This is a memoir. This is telling the story of some sort of transformation
Mhm.
that you, the author, have gone through.
Mhm.
And I'm always able to go back to that. This is and sometimes those scenes are really well written. I'm like, this is a heart-wrenching scene. How does this tie into the main story? And so I never tell my clients to murder their darlings. I tell them to have a folder and to move their
Mhm.
darlings into, I'm like, "Call it a farm. You're just gonna send them to the farm, but
Or
it's an
re
actual farm where they stay living." I said, "And sometimes you may find that you go back there for ideas, and you may have a novella, you may have a short story, you may have an essay, you may have another book in there." But that way, you're not just getting rid of it, because I feel like if I were the author and I had my editor tell me, "This doesn't work in this book, get rid of it," they're invalidating my life and my lived experiences, and I never want anyone to feel that way. So, I feel like telling them to just put it in here, they know it's still there. They know that their experience is valuable and validated, but we're focusing on this. So, and again, it goes back to that heart forward. I wanna make sure that I'm not crushing an author, especially a first-time author, by saying, "This doesn't work, let's just get rid of it." But I will also say this may be a bit much for the reader, and they may disengage from the narrative. So you never wanna lose that engagement. Let's look at, if you do wanna keep it in here, how can we reframe it so we keep the reader engaged, so they don't disengage as a way to protect themselves?
Yes,
We'll explore that.
yes, because the biggest thing about a memoir in particular is that you're right, it can be cathartic. It probably is cathartic. But remembering who your reader is, going back to that teaching element, your
Yep.
reader is probably the one going through this, or it's fresh for them. It needs to be a scar for you. So if it feels like a wound has opened up in the reading, if it feels like you might have been crying, or this felt like it almost feels like it should be a journal entry, like, for instance, when I see something like that, I'll annotate, "I could tell this was hard for you, and I'm
Mhm.
sorry you went through this.
Yep.
This feels like it belongs in a journal." And I think what it's doing is that your reader does they are looking to you to take for you to take their hand and guide them, not them to carry this for you. So, consider reworking this, and if
Mhm.
you need to take some breaks from it to do so, do that, and if you can't, remember who your reader is, because it's not going to help them, and which means it won't help your book, type of thing. And
Exactly.
that thank you for saying that though, because it is hard. To your point, when you see somebody and they're writing this memoir too as a way to it's a form of healing for them,
Mhm.
but they wouldn't be hitting publish if they weren't trying to help other people.
Exactly. Exactly, and that is also one of the questions I have with my intake form, is like, who is your audience? Who are you trying to help a certain segment of the population with this work? And what is your goal? So, again, it goes back to my instructional design training, where we talk with subject matter experts at the beginning and go, who are your learners? What do you want them to learn? What do you hope they take away from this? I will ask my memoir authors and nonfiction authors, what are you hoping your readers will walk away from this and talk about with other people?
And even that carries into fiction, because if you think about it, you still what do you want to do for your reader? You want to thrill them. You want to take them on adventure. You want to delight them. You want to give them an escape. What do
Mhm.
you want them to do when they finished that book? Obviously, you if you have another book in that series, you want them to be ready for the next book or continue reading in the series, or if they've picked up midway through, you want them to go back and check out the beginning. You want them to check out other pieces, or maybe there's some themes in particular that you were touching on, and maybe you have questions at the end, like a book club idea where you'd say,
Mhm.
"What would you do?" what would you think? And so I kind of see books, regardless of genre, as a conversation. Like the author has started it, the reader is the one going, hey, I just read this book. Kristen, you got to
Yes.
read this and tell me what you think.
Yes.
So there's
Yes.
a conversation. All the author did was start that. And the
Yeah.
reader is continuing it because they've shared it with someone else. That's creating more conversation. So those are things that, regardless of genre, those are outputs that you're looking for.
I did a developmental edit on a memoir recently, and talking with the author before I started working on it, I said, "What is your goal with this?" She says, "I want readers to recommend this book to other readers." So I'm you were talking, I'm like, yes, yes, all of those. But how do I approach that as an editor? Well, again, it's considering who the reader is for this particular book and what are they going to talk about. And oftentimes, I mean, we could get into a whole conversation about this, about things going on in society. So sadly, I see a lot of the same stories through memoir, especially memoir written by women. And so it's a matter of, okay, how does this same story that we've heard about a lot, and
Mhm.
often it's about abuse, it's a story that we've heard about a lot. An agent may pass on it because it's a story that's been told before. What about it makes it unique to you? What is your perspective on this? And how is this going to help readers in a way that the other books out there on the market that have already been published help them?
Yes. Yes. Kristen, this has been awesome. Where can people connect with you? Where can authors and writers who are looking to get a heart-centered approach for their editing, how can they connect with you?
Well, I am on Threads. Kristen Tatroe is my handle. I'm also on Instagram, same handle. And my website is probably the best place to go. It's kristenedits.com. Very easy. KRISTENEDITS.com. And my email is kristen@kristenedits.com. Can't be any more simple than that.
Awesome. Kristen, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Jen. This was so much fun.